in studio, we have our business editor, Xolani Mbanjwa. Xolani, good to see you. Just announced 1.2% growth. But it is said we are not out of the woods yet. Your reaction to that?
Yeah, we're not going to be out of the woods for some time to come, and I don't think many people expect, us to be out of the woods for quite a while. There has been an interesting, developments when it comes to this, this data that came out. If you go back to quarter one, now Statistician has announced that the 1.1, quarter on quarter, seasonally adjusted, increase in gross domestic product has been revised downwards to 1%. This, keeping it in the second quarter at 1.2%, it's still, it's not negative. It's still quite positive. I think we shouldn't underestimate the impact that COVID-19 continues to have, and will continue to have on our economy. We see that in the job stats. We see that also in the investments numbers that are coming out. So it's something that is, not that positive in, with many people expecting it to be higher than 1.2%, but it's a fourth consecutive quarter of growth coming from a very, very low base. If you remember, second quarter of 2020. So this is quite good and interesting when you look at which sectors actually contributed the most and which other ones actually declined this time around.
I'm glad you raised that issue, because one of the things that we do know is that transport and communications grew by 6.9%. What do we attribute this to?
It could be a number of factors, Hugo. The Statistics South Africa office has rebased the manner in which it calculates South Africa's, economy, giving some sectors much more weight compared to others. So if you look at, what they've done in the fourth quarter, that's when they started doing this. In the first quarter of this year and the second quarter, they are yet to announce to us how actually this happened. For example, household consumption is now contributing and weighed much higher than it was before. And when you look at investments, which were much bigger in terms of weight in how we calculate GDP, it's now just a bit lower. So it's a number of things. When you look at what was happening in the second quarter, there was a bit of that load shedding that actually took place, and we were in the throes of a third wave, so to speak. It was just beginning right there. So there are a number of factors, but it would be good to actually get it from Statistician to find out what this is attributed to, whether the rebasing they have done has had a major impact in the second quarter numbers that they've released today.
Well, we are expecting to have a conversation with Mr. Risenga Maluleke from Stats SA. And hopefully that's one of the questions that we certainly can ask him. But agriculture is amongst the top performing sectors with a growth of 6.2%.
Yes, it's been like that for a very long time. Even when all our other sectors were in the doldrums, agriculture still maintained some level of activity in the farms as a primary, as a primary sector. Is quite important. It shows in the numbers that as a contributor, it might be a small contributor to GDP, but the growth in itself has been quite huge. I remember in one quarter last year, it was all sectors were in the red. Only agriculture was, in the green, contributing positively and growing positively. And it is something that has been said by a lot of people to say we are not paying as much attention to agriculture as we should. We export a lot of, this produce, and we export a lot of skills as well, because South African farmers, that sector is quite respected globally. But you're absolutely right. When when you look at the other sectors that normally would actually do well, mining has just done just 0.9%, not that well overall. Although there was a huge growth in the in the expenditure, in how much money was paid in dividend, and it's something that is quite interesting to look at how mining actually played out in the second quarter. And as I understand it, we do have the Statistician General joining us briefly to just talk to us about these particular numbers, if you can lead us there.
Yeah, we certainly do. Mr. Maluleke, very good afternoon. Great to speak to you. Xolani and I have obviously been talking about GDP expanding by 1.2%, and one of the things that's being said is that we are not out of the woods yet. Just take us through some of the key highlights from these figures that we are looking at.
Well, the first thing that we have recorded in the second quarter is transport that rose by 6.9% and contributing 0.5 of a percentage point. And that was followed by personal services, which rose by 2.5% and contributed 0.4 of a percentage point. And we see that agriculture rose by 6.2% and contributed 0.2 of a percentage point, as well as trade, that contributed 0.3 of a percentage point and rising at 2.2%. Now, these were the biggest contributors, whereas there are those that tried or didn't perform well in the form of finance, construction, and manufacturing, as well as government. And we'll know that construction has been struggling for quite some time.
Mr. Maluleke, you have rebased the manner in which you work and weigh some of these sectors. Just take us through the significance of that rebasing this time around, particularly since we had heard that you would actually do the rebasing and for the first quarter as well as the second quarter.
What we have done is a statistical agency from time to time, with new information and new data becoming available, does improve in the way it does its work in terms of international best practice. Now, when you look at where we were last time, our base was 2010, and we had to elevate that to 2015 prices in terms of the rebasing, which has seen our economy rising by about 9.2% from where it was previously at 4.79 trillion to about 5.13 trillion. Now, when you look at that, it also we also introduced taking away the annualized version of our headline. We were amongst the 3 remaining countries in the world that included the United States and Canada. And after a 3-year project through which we consulted our users, we took away the annualization. And as you will see now, our headline number of 1.2% of growth is seasonally adjusted, but we are no longer bringing in the annualized version.
Let's talk about gross fixed capital formation. Investments are up 0.9% compared to the previous periods. There has been a steady growth overall. This is exactly what we want to see. Talk to us about investments and how they have done, and which sectors have actually attracted the most investments.
Well, the first thing that I want us to talk about when we talk about investments is that we will know that we are coming out of a COVID-19 environment. And even before we talk about investments, let us look at the real economy. the real economy in the second quarter of 2020 went on a slump and decline, but it started to rise or grow in the third quarter, fourth quarter, as well as in the first quarter of this year, where we are sitting now with a real GDP sitting at 1.13 trillion as of the second quarter of 2021 is almost the same as where we were in the fourth quarter of 2017. So COVID-19 has had an impact, and it does have an impact in investments as well. But specifically on investments, as you will have seen in the second quarter, that the whole area of construction works, residential buildings as well as non-residentials, went on the negative growth, whereas in terms of other assets as well as machinery, particularly in the area of motor-related machinery, we have seen a recovery in those areas.
Mr. Maluleke, mining data seems to be missing. It has not been released, particularly for the month of July. How did you deal with, that data missing? If I'm not mistaken, I did see here how the mining sector has actually contributed and grown in that particular quarter, but it seems to be missing when it comes to the month of July. What does that mean?
Firstly is that there were delays in the release. Of course, we get this in the form of administrative data from the Department of Minerals and Energy. But such delays didn't impact on the current estimates of GDP, because we did receive the data from the Department of Minerals and Energy, and it has accordingly been factored in. So what you are seeing is a complete set of the quarter, albeit the delays that have been there in the mining data. And this is a matter that myself and the Director General of Minerals and Energy were seized with, and he made sure that he led this initiative from his side until we got the data in time for this release of the GDP.
Thank you very much, Mr. Risenga Maluleke, the Statistician General at Statistics South Africa, giving us some highlights of what exactly the second quarter GDP data actually looks like at 1.2% quarter on quarter, and something that is, some people would view it as not in a positive light, Hugo, as many were expecting these numbers to come in at much higher, levels, seeing that we were not at an absolute hard lockdown in that particular period.